Mr. President,
Democrat leader.
ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, it's now been a whole week of Donald Trump's government shutdown, and the country is feeling the sting of Republican intransigence. Over 700,000 federal employees have been furloughed. Services are being disrupted. The Wall Street Journal reported this morning that businesses nationwide with government contracts are in peril. The Republican-manufactured disaster did not need to happen. The government is shut down for one reason, and one reason only. Donald Trump and the Republicans would rather kick 15 million people off health insurance, would rather raise premiums by thousands and thousands of dollars a year on over tens of millions of Americans, rather than sit down and work with Democrats on fixing health care. That's the reason. They'd rather kick tens of millions off health care than sit down with us and work with us on addressing this so important issue, so important to the American people. Now, Americans are frustrated. The cost of living continues to go up. Donald Trump's tariffs have sent grocery prices spiking. It's even more expensive now to buy a cup of coffee. First things many people drink in the morning, they're going to see Trump's tariffs hurting them. People are worried about paying more on their electricity bill. 41 states have seen increased prices. Why? Because in their mania of hating clean energy, they cut out so much of wind and solar being the cheapest form of new energy to go on the grid. Americans are pessimistic that any of this is going to get any better, and they blame President Trump and the Republicans. A CBS poll from a few days ago found that 75% of Americans don't think the Trump administration, is focusing enough on lowering costs. Fixing health care would be at the top of the list for lowering costs for people. Now, Democrats want to reopen the government right away. We want to have a serious negotiation to fix health care so that people can see their costs go down. And we can do both. Fix health care and reopen the government. This is not an either-or thing, which Republicans are making it. And the American people don't like it. Democrats have been consistent. Our position remains the same. We've been saying it for months. Republicans are shutting down the government because they refuse to address the crisis in American health care. One sentence sums it all up. Republicans are shutting down the government because they refuse to fix and address the crisis in American health care. Now, our Republican colleagues, being against public sentiment, are flailing. On the one hand, it's starting to sink in for Republicans that their position of not fixing health care is untenable in the eyes of the American people. As President Lincoln said, public sentiment is everything. Well, public sentiment is building on fixing health care. It's high already. It's getting higher every day. And it's not going to recede. It's getting even stronger. Republicans refuse to acknowledge that public sentiment is not on the side of Trump and Johnson. And Johnson has become the #1 roadblock to ending a shutdown. He sent everyone home for 3 weeks now. If you care about fixing the crisis, if you care about reopening the government, how the hell do you keep your House not in session for 3 weeks? And now but even so, Johnson himself is feeling the heat. At first, he and his caucus were telling Republicans in the House, don't talk about health care. They knew the American people were against what they thought. Johnson's leadership team explicitly told members in a memo not to mention health care when talking about the shutdown. Of course, that didn't work, because the public knows overwhelmingly that we need lower health care premiums, and that's what Democrats are fighting for, and that's what's preventing the Republicans from coming to the table. They don't want to fix it. That's why they're causing the shutdown. So, feeling the heat, Speaker Johnson held a press conference yesterday and said perhaps one of the most ridiculous things I've heard from Republicans in a long time. He said, "Look me right under the camera," said Johnson, I'll tell you very clearly, Republicans are the ones concerned about health care. As he did it, he couldn't look right into the camera. Deep in his subconscious, he knew he wasn't telling the truth. What he said was nonsense. He couldn't even look in the camera when he said this because he knows the American people don't buy what he's saying. Republicans are the ones who cut $1 trillion from Medicaid, who tried to repeal the ACA. 3 times we asked them to vote to sustain it after the new year. 3 times they voted it down. So that's first. And second, Donald Trump is making all these terrible threats led by the evil Mr. Vote. Trump is saying he's going to fire people en masse, saying that federal workers don't even deserve back pay, even though he signed the law guaranteeing back pay in 2019. Again, they're threatening, they're bludgeoning, they're using the American people, government workers, as pawns. But these kind of tactics from the administration are backfiring. Americans don't like being used as pawns, even if they're not one subject to being held hostage. They don't like watching it happen. And the American people know clearly that it's Republicans who are in charge. Republicans have the White House. They control the House and the Senate. So when people are laid off, when people are not paid, when people are not getting back pay, they know it's the Republicans trying to do it, even though they're using it to try and bully us. It's not Democrats who are threatening to fire people or threatening to withhold back pay. It's the Republican side, Donald Trump, saying all of this, and the American people know it and will blame them for these mass firings and chaos. The data is very clear that trying to use the public as political pawns will backfire for Republicans. And plenty of Republicans in Congress know this. That's why behind closed doors, some Republicans are praying the administration tones down its threats, because these mean-spirited tactics by Russell Vogt aren't going to win in the court of public opinion or in the hearts and minds of Americans. Look, Republicans are tripping over themselves because they're divided on the core issue, fixing people's health care. When someone on the hard right, the hard right, Marjorie Taylor Greene openly says Republican leaders are wrong and that we need to fix the premiums, that's how you know how deeply Republicans are split. Let me read what she said. Quote, this is Marjorie Taylor Greene, not Chuck Schumer. "I'm going to go against everyone on this issue," health care that is, "because when tax credits expire this year, my own adult children's insurance premiums for 2026 are going to double, along with all the wonderful families and hardworking people in my district. More Republicans should listen to her, because on this issue, she's right on the money." Meanwhile, Democrats' position hasn't changed. We urge our Republican colleagues to join us in a serious negotiation to reopen the government and extend ACA premiums. It's the right thing to do for the American people, and by doing it, we'll be able to quickly reopen the government before any more serious damage is done by the Republicans to our country. And finally, on nominations, Mr. President, today the Senate will vote to advance the nomination of Jennifer Mascott of Maryland to be a circuit court judge for the Third Circuit. I'll oppose Mascott's nomination because she does not seem to have any other qualification for the job other than this. She's a career loyalist, a sycophant to Donald Trump. She has no connections to the Third Circuit. She's never lived in Delaware. She's not even licensed to practice law in Delaware. In fact, her only link to the state is a beachside summer home. If you look at Mascott's resume, the only time she's ever really practiced law is the 2 years she worked in the Trump's Department of Justice. That's it. And you're putting her on the circuit court, one of the most important courts in the country? Well, the only reason Donald Trump's putting Mascott on the bench is because he thinks she will do whatever he wants from the bench. She'll be a total Trump sycophant. Not look at the law, not look at the facts. Just look at Donald Trump and see which way he's nodding and follow it. This nominee is another Trump example. It's another troubling example of the Trumpification of the federal bench, where loyalists replace jurists and obeisance to Trump matters more than adherence to the law or precedent or even the Constitution. It's just like what we saw yesterday in the Judiciary Committee. Pam Bondi exposed herself as woefully unqualified to be Attorney General, but a supremely obeisant Trump deputy is what she is instead. She spent her time dodging questions, hurling insults, and, most importantly for Donald Trump, defending the president's interests more than anything else, even if the law or the facts or the truth pointed strongly in the other direction. This troubling pattern of obeisance, above all, in our judiciary system is dangerous, troubling. So I will oppose today's nominee and urge my colleagues to do the same. Yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Senate and quorum call?
Yes.
I would ask unanimous consent the quorum call be suspended.
The objection.
Mr. President, we are now in day 8 of a government shutdown, and which is truly unfortunate and unnecessary, and totally at the behest of left-wing Democrat special interest groups who have pressured the Democrat leadership into a position that makes absolutely no sense to any thinking person. I want you to think about where we are. Think about this scenario. You have a bill passed by the House of Representatives over here in the Senate, 24 pages long, clean, short-term, nonpartisan, no policy writers, no Republican priorities, a clean resolution to fund the government, which there are 55 senators, 55 out of 100 senators are voting for the clean, short-term funding resolution that would open up the government. The President of the United States has said that as soon as it is passed in the Senate, he will sign it into law. So what you have is complete, unified support for a short-term funding resolution to keep the government open and make sure that all the government employees who are currently being impacted and their families can get back to work and get paid again. And so it's always interesting when the Democrat leader comes down here and describes this fantasy world where the bill that they proposed, which would only get 47 votes here in the United States Senate, not even 50, not 51, not a majority, and certainly not the 60 that are necessary to pass consequential legislation in the Senate, it wouldn't get a single vote in the House of Representatives. So they've got a bill, a proposal, that they say keeps the government open, that can't pass the Senate, wouldn't pass the House, and wouldn't be signed into law by the President. You tell me who is responsible for the government shutdown. Republicans passed a bill in the House, over here in the Senate, 24 pages long, sitting right at the desk. We can pick it up and pass it today, send it to the President, who will sign it into law, the government opens up again. Or you can take this proposal the Democrats have, which has a $1.5 trillion in new spending, allows for free health care coverage for non-citizens, completely obliterates the $50 billion rural hospital fund that we put in place to support rural hospitals in this country who are struggling. And they think that would pass, doesn't pass here, doesn't pass the House, wouldn't get signed into law of the President. So just a logical person, think about this. Think about the juxtaposition of those two positions, and you tell me who is shutting the government down. We have a straightforward, simple proposition. A 24-page funding resolution to keep the government open with no partisan policy riders, no gimmicks, short-term, funds the government through November the 21st to give us an opportunity to continue to do the government funding the way we should do it through the appropriations process, where we have the committees meeting and Republicans and Democrats contributing, and then bring it to the floor and have an open amendment process here. That's the way the government should normally be funded. And so what this does is provides a short-term extension in order for all that to happen. That's all that we're talking about. Now, they have other issues they want to bring up, which I've said before, we're happy to discuss. And yes, there are some things that I think there is interest on both sides in trying to address when it comes to health care in this country. But you can't take the federal government hostage and expect to have a reasonable conversation on those issues. The government needs to be funded. Federal employees need to go back to work. Federal agencies and departments need to be open in providing the services that the American people expect. It's that simple. And that's really what this is all about. Again, nothing more, nothing less, nothing else. It's whether or not they want to support a 24-page funding resolution that keeps the government open or continue to vote for $1.5 trillion in new spending, free health care for non-citizens, and completely wiping out a $50 billion rural hospital fund that's designed to support rural hospitals in this country. Something that would get 47 votes here in the Senate and not a majority in the House of Representatives. Wouldn't get a single vote, honestly, among Republicans in the House of Representatives, and would not be signed into law by the President. Versus something, again, passed by the House, here at the Senate. All we need is 5 more votes. There are a majority of United States senators today who support the short-term funding resolution. 55 out of 100. We need 5 Democrats. You tell me who's shutting the government down. And Mr. President, I think that the public is coming wise to this debate and this argument and these fallacious arguments that are being made by the Democrats. In fact, there's a new Harvard-Harris poll that came out Monday that found that 70% of voters oppose the government shutdown. 70%. And of interest to my Democrat colleagues, 65% of voters, including 63% of independents, think Democrats should end the shutdown by accepting a continuing resolution like the clean funding resolution I just described that's in front of us. So what are my Democrat colleagues doing? Well, after their resounding defeat in the presidential election last November, you'd think they might be paying attention to the strong majority of voters who would like the shutdown to end as well. Now, you'd think they might notice that 63% of independents, voters I'm sure Democrats would like to capture in the next election, want Democrats to accept a resolution like the clean CR in front of us. But you'd be wrong. Because, Mr. President, Democrats are still deeply enthralled to the far left. And they're taking their marching orders for this shutdown from far-left interest groups. And I mean that literally. A recent Axios article reported, and I quote, "Progressive grassroots groups are blasting congressional Democrats on speed dial to hold the line in any negotiations to reopen the government," end quote. Now that followed an Axios report that found, and I quote again, "Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and his staff are closely coordinating their government shutdown strategy with outside liberal groups. Backing down and helping fund the government like Schumer did in March is unacceptable," the groups have told his team, end quote. Backing down and helping fund the government like Schumer did in March is unacceptable, the groups have told his team, end quote. And so the liberal groups say, jump, and Democrat leaders say, how high? Forget the robust majority of independents who want Democrats to end this shutdown. You know, Mr. President, back in the day, and by back in the day, I mean as recently as 6 months ago, the Democrat leader was a pretty passionate opponent of government shutdowns. Yeah, he was an opponent. So much so that even though he didn't like the continuing resolution we passed in the spring, he voted for it anyway because in his words, and again I quote, "A government shutdown would be far worse," end quote. But then progressive groups got big time mad. And now the Democrat leader is leading the charge to keep the government shut down indefinitely, apparently. And all those federal workers and hardworking Americans he was so worried about before seem to have just slipped his mind. In fact, Democrats have barely reacted to the fact that federal workers are going to start missing pay. Mr. President, when we realized that we were going to need a continuing resolution to allow us more time to complete the fiscal year 2026 appropriations bills, Republicans wanted to do everything we could to ensure that there was no government shutdown. which is why we put forward a clean, continuing resolution with no Republican policies or partisan policy riders. We knew a shutdown would be costly and disruptive for hardworking Americans, and we were determined to ensure the Democrats had no reason to oppose our CR. But Democrats weren't deterred by the fact that there was nothing for them to object to in our bill, and they decided to oppose it anyway. Now, Mr. President, Democrats will get another chance this week to vote to keep the government open. And I hope that the Democrat leader and Democrat senators can summon up some of that concern they used to have about shutdowns and vote to reopen the government. At the very least, if the Democrat leader is too worried about his polling to vote to reopen himself, he could allow Democrat senators who do care about the functioning of our government to join Republicans to reopen. Mr. President, I yield the floor.